TelecomTV, where ICT connects.
Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. My name is Martyn Warwick and we're here in Northern California, in Silicon Valley, in fact, in the USA, where we're attending the 4th ETSI ISG meeting on NFV. What is that, you might well ask? Well, I'll tell you. It is the industry standardization group who are helping to define network functions virtualization. And I'm talking with Farid Feisullin, who is with the Sprint CTO group. Fred, thanks for taking time out on what's a very busy day. This is the 4th such meeting of the ISG. What exactly has been achieved to date, and why is this work so important for the industry in general and for service providers in particular?
About NFV, I think there's a common problem amongst all the service providers today, and that is that it's just too expensive to run a network that's built in silos, where the cost per bit is too high to run the services that we're running through the network. The costs continue to escalate and the revenue is flat or flattening. And we need a better solution that can not only help to drive those costs down, but also to work our way up the value chain. If NFV is being done properly, if it's implemented properly the way we're driving it to, we will be able to create more services in less time using third-party sources that can't even get into our network today.
The telecoms industry is traditionally bureaucratic and slow-moving. It has to be because of the nature of the network and its history. However, things are changing now, and at last, people are beginning to work together. Network operators, telcos, are beginning to work together. Do you think that the ISG is helping those companies in what it's doing to shave years off what have been very leisurely, indeed tardy, development cycles?
That's certainly the hope. We're trying to create a flexible architecture wherein we can put in any network function into a common substrate layer and control that through a common centralized orchestrator, so that we can take, for example, an algorithm that's developed by Stanford University researchers and plug it into an existing base station or some part of the network that's been virtualized and be able to see the benefits of that in a very short period of time. Today, if I were to take that algorithm and try to plug it in, it would take me a year and a half to work with a vendor just to start to get it into the lab, nonetheless into commercial service. But using NFV and the concepts that we're developing here in the forum, we'll be able to do a Lego block implementation of these functions, swapping out blocks, putting in blocks, functional blocks, to achieve better performance and new services.
So for the first time in telecoms history, we're seeing a coming together of competitors and rivals who a few years ago would have been tearing strips out of each other. Is this because of NFV and the ISG?
That's a really great question. Somehow there's no power like an idea whose time has come, it's been said. And I think the concept of virtualization, which has achieved 50 to 60% cost gains in the IT industry, has been hovering over the telco space for a long time. And we want to be able to achieve those kind of gains. Certainly the possibility exists. There are a lot of vendors now who at one time would compete against each other. Now they're in a common framework talking together, and even service providers who are competing against each other are working together because we have to address the problem of rising costs and working our way up the value chain. We don't have that capability easily in a network, that complex network that we've designed today. In fact, if network functions virtualization technology was available the way it is today, by the time the 3GPP standards, the 3GPP2 standards were invented, those standards would have been written very differently. And I think people realize across the board that there's a lot of room for improvement, and there's also a lot of people who want this to happen sooner, and so the vendors are responding to their customers.
NFV is barely a year old. The first white paper exactly a year ago in Germany, another one out last week. It seems to have come from nowhere to everywhere overnight. Why is that?
I think there are a lot of innovative players in the internet space today. And those startup companies have introduced a lot of those concepts into the telco market. And I think that's been a large driver, a momentum generator, that the fact that, if one vendor does it and another vendor does it, it causes a cascade effect. But I think it's hard to argue with the concept and the value of it. So eventually you're going to generate the momentum. And that's really what we're seeing that's happening, because it just makes too much sense to go through this route of virtualizing the network as opposed to continuing on the stovepipe architectures that we have today.
And what about this concept of open source in the telco community? That is revolutionary. It's never been done before.
Yeah, I think the telco industry is a very conservative industry. And in the same sense that NFV has broken down the walls within the operators and between operators and between vendors, it's also breaking down walls within the service provider. Now we have the IT and the network development and the research branches of these telco service providers all working together more and more closely, because they know they have to in order to implement the gains successfully. There are different skill sets in each group, but they all have to integrate together. We have to eliminate silos there, as well as between vendors and between service providers, to make this a reality. And because of the fact that open source is one of those new tools that is available through network functions virtualization, well, that wall has to be broken down as well. So, and that's a new accelerator for introducing innovation sooner, beyond just having some of the newer internet type startup company mentality vendors come into the market.
Moving on from the slightly more general to the more particular, there's a lot of debate on 86 base architecture and whether or not it will be able to support the kind of traffic we're seeing on networks now, as well as going forward as traffic continues to increase. What do you make of that?
Excellent questions. Well, there's generally the agreement and realization that the 86 base technology, the cores, are capable of supporting the kind of network loads that are seen on the control plane. There's a big question about can it support the bearer plane loads that have been out there and are going to continue to grow over the years. And the answer right now appears to be yes. Through using some acceleration technologies today from a third-party vendor that you can plug into the network, it can span that gap. But even without that, today there are software tools and capabilities that can actually achieve very close to what can be achieved on ASICs today, but not quite there. But the encouraging thought is that there are a lot of companies that are researching changing the architecture of their chipsets to include the capabilities that are found in ASICs today and building them into the chipset itself. So I think in the next 2 years, you're going to see a big convergence of the bearer plane capabilities to what ASICs can provide today. The ASICs will always be a little bit ahead of the curve, and there will be a need for them, but I think that need will be more specialized.
A final question to you then, Fred. OSS is a mess, I believe so anyway, and so do many others in the industry. It's all over the place like spilled spaghetti. Will NFV and the ISG begin to change that and make it more rational and more globally applicable?
That's also a really good question. Along with the distribution of network functions across a uniform substrate of architecture, a lot of questions are raised about, well, how do you manage that? How do you instantiate those functions? How do you scale them? How do you grow them? And how do you get these different functions to talk to each other so they can create a new end-to-end service? And that's been one of the foremost study topics within my group, the software architecture group, and also within the management and orchestration group. See, the good thing about the work that we're doing here, one of the good things in the ETSI forum is I believe we have succeeded in shaving years off the development time of deploying network functions virtualization through getting the vendors to talk to each other and listening to the service providers' needs and having the service providers aggregate a common pool of needs that have to be developed first. We've been able to put a lot of the key issues on the table and accelerate the development of the thought and design behind network functions virtualization.
Farid Feisullin, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
TelecomTV, where ICT connects.